Are you ready for Revolution 3? Well, this is actually a part of our unit that is close to my heart. I'm a little nervous because I want to get it right. I had to consult with family members to try and make sure I was getting the most important parts to communicate with you. We're going to talk about China, and China's story of revolution is one of rebellion, but also regression. Regression means not progress, but to go backwards. And that's kind of what happened with the revolution. Even though it seemed like such a leap forward, it was actually sliding backward in many cases. So we're going to start with the father of China. And when I say that, it sounds kind of silly because China is a 5,000-year-old civilization. So to say that China had a father, we're talking about modern China. We're talking about a new era, a new age for China, and the end of the dynasties. And the year to remember is 1911, which might ring a bell if you remember that in Mexico, there was a revolution in 1910, 1911. So 1911 was certainly a year of revolutions around the world. The father of modern China, the father of the Chinese Revolution, is Sun Yat-sen. Now that is a Cantonese form of his name, and so that's the one that's used most often, but his name actually is also pronounced Sun Yi-xian in Mandarin. So just for what it's worth, Sun Yat-sen. So Sun is his family name. That would be like my name, Baden, my last name. But in Chinese, the last name is first. The family name is first. Sun Yat-sen was the father of revolution in China, and it started back in 1894. And 1894 was a very difficult time for China. We didn't touch on this earlier, but you need to know that, of course, we did talk about the Ching dynasty starting to fail, becoming very corrupt. Remember that the Empress Dowager Cixi was leading the country, which was very strange because usually it was an emperor, but this is the emperor, the former emperor's mother. And so there were people who wanted to overthrow Cixi, and in addition, you had that whole foreign presence, all these foreign countries slicing and dicing up China and trying to gain influence, and they had succeeded in the Opium Wars to open more ports, and so they had more tentacles into the land of China. So revolutionaries were gathering, and they were plotting, and they were beginning to think, how can we change China for the better? A very important event was the war between Japan and the Qing dynasty, which happened, it's called the Sino-Japanese War. Sino means China, it's a Latin form. And so the Sino-Japanese War was from 1894 to 1895. As a result, in 1895, China lost Taiwan, and that was very significant. Taiwan, even though it hadn't been controlled by China throughout its history, it was actually seen as a pirate island, and honestly, it was left to itself because it wasn't considered to be that important. But as China, developed its naval power, they understood that Taiwan would be a very important Navy base. And so after the war, Taiwan was given to Japan. It was also known as Formosa, which is the Portuguese name or the Spanish name. And so you can see that already back in the 1600s, there was colonization of China by European powers. But that loss of the Sino-Japanese War was a huge blow to the identity of Chinese people. And so Sun Yat-sen was a leader who said, we need to help China rise. And so he helped to form the China Rising Society. And the name for that is Xinzhong Hui. Xing means to wake up. Zhong is the word for middle, and it's China's name. So the Middle Kingdom is a nickname for China. So Xinzhong, and then Hui. It's spelled Hui. So some of these words, I know that you will not be able to learn Mandarin Chinese right away, but just know that usually means society or party, a political organization. Sometimes they don't say they're political. They are a group that meets. That's what a Hui is, okay? And so the Xinzhong Hui was one of the first organizations that formed, and because the Qing dynasty still had power and they knew that these revolutionaries were working, they pushed them out of the country. They forced them into exile. They arrested revolutionaries and tortured them and executed them. And so Sun Yat-sen was forced to go other places, and he went all over. He went to Japan. He went to the United States, San Francisco. He was here in San Francisco, and there are places that are known as places he lived and worked with the Xinzhong Hui. And he went to Canada, he went to the UK, and what he was doing is he was rallying the overseas Chinese who had become very successful. Remember, after the Taiping Revolution, during that time of unrest, Chinese people went all over the world, and this continued later as different places required more labor, and so they were importing Chinese workers. Well, a lot of those Chinese workers became Chinese business people, and they made a lot of money and became very successful as overseas Chinese. And Sun Yat-sen realized that China, in many ways, needed to be saved by Chinese, we call them expatriates. That doesn't mean that they're not patriots. It means that they are out of their home country. And so Chinese overseas, Chinese expatriates were the ones that had money that could be used to fund a revolution, an ongoing revolution. It took a long time, 20 years, before this revolution could come to a conclusion. Later on, Sun, I'll call him Sun. Some people just say Sun. So whatever you want, just know in Chinese it'd be more like Sun. Sun was responsible for creating the Tongmeng Hui. The Tongmeng Hui was a revolutionary alliance. Think Star Wars. So it's a group that was fighting against the evil empire, which in this case was China's Qing government. And so the Tongmeng Hui, again, Hui at the end of that word is a group, a party, an organization, an alliance. And so the Revolutionary Alliance continued to fight all through the period that we'll call the Chinese Revolution. And there was another organization that was kind of underneath the Tongmeng Hui, and it was called the Yuan Hui. The Yuan Hui, again, another organization that has Hui at the end, right? So these are all revolutionary organizations. Maybe we need to think of it as a part of Chinese culture and identity, that you don't just think of individuals. It's not just these heroes that saved the country, like Napoleon when we think of France. He just kind of did it because he was a strong leader and people followed him. But Sun in China knew the Chinese people, knew Chinese culture, Confucianism, where you honor relationships with other people. And so the community is so important. And that's what Sun knew he had to do. He had to bring people together and gain support. So by himself, he wouldn't have been able to create a revolution. Now, at the end of the 1800s, from 1899 to 1901, you have the Boxer Rebellion. And that Boxer Rebellion, it was kind of strange because you had some revolutionary activity, but Cixi knew that the foreigners were gaining too much power, and so she kind of supported the Boxers against the foreigners. maybe just look the other way while they did their revolting against missionaries and business people and driving foreigners out of the country. And remember that the United States participated in the Boxer Rebellion's response. They came and they joined European powers to put down the Boxer Rebellion. There was an uprising at this time, and it was Sun basically saying, okay, the time has come, we need to do something. And so at Huizhou is a city, and it's close to the Yangtze River, so the southern of those two rivers. It's on the southern bank, and so Huizhou is where he had actually two different uprisings. And one was in 1900 and one was in 1907. So even there you see a period of time where it just wasn't totally working, but Sun had to be very patient and persistent. And so that's what he's known for, his persistence, his endurance to keep fighting for Chinese freedom and liberty. It's a different story from the story of the colonies in the New World, the Revolutionary War that we talk about. So the Huizhou uprising had to do with basically, it had to do with taxation and the corruption of the Ching Empire. So it was small and it wasn't successful, and Sun then had to flee. It was actually related to the railroads. That's one thing I wanted to mention. That remember that the railroads were a foreign invasion of China, and it was one reason that the Boxer Rebellion got going. And so Sun was supporting a movement against the Qing dynasty related to the railroads, but eventually it failed. And then the next uprising that we need to talk about, there were many, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but this one's called the Qinzhou uprising. This was about taxation, and it was again put down. So just know Qinzhou, like Huizhou, they're very similar, and I think probably the main thing is Sun Yat-sen was involved in both, and they were 7 years apart. Now, the next uprising is a little bit more visual, okay? It's called the Zhennanguan uprising, and it happened in Mountain Pass. And so maybe something to remember about these uprisings, they often happened at the outskirts of the empire, where there was maybe less power on the part of the emperor and the Qing rulers. And so Sun knew that you kind of pick apart at the fringe of the empire, and that's how you can win. And so this battle took place in a mountain pass, and there was a tower there, and revolutionaries were able to take over the cannon tower that was in the Zhennanguan Pass. And it was a good development, because it showed that the revolutionaries were gaining momentum, that they had some military strength. Sun actually went and fought himself. So sometimes you think of these revolutionary leaders, are they just talkers or are they doers? And Sun certainly was a doer. So this is 1907. We're moving toward the culmination of this revolution. And finally, the Wuchang uprising was the climax of this period, and it came in October of 1911. The Wuchang uprising it happened when Sun was out of the country. It's interesting to note too that he grew up in Hawaii. Remember that Hawaii It had many workers that came from other places like China and Japan, and they settled there as agricultural workers. And so Sun actually was one of those overseas Chinese people. And to become the father of the Chinese Revolution, he had to love China so much to come back from abroad. So the Wuchang Uprising, it was in the city of Wuchang, and it was very successful. It was the capturing of the whole city, the founding of a base of operations for the revolutionaries. Remember the Tongmenghui, and some of the Qing leaders. Remember, they were called bannermen, and that meant that they fought under the banners of the emperor. And so the bannermen were killed in the fighting, and it was a very significant moment. It wasn't the end. The fighting would continue, but the Qing army was led by a man named Yuan Shi-kai. Yuan Shi-kai was the leader of the Qing army, and we'll talk about him, but just know that he realized that the revolutionaries were much stronger than they had been before, and so he had to make some decisions related to how he was leading the army. So the Wuchang Uprising is seen as the pivotal moment. That's why October 10th is seen as such a major holiday in Chinese society all over the world, and specifically today in Taiwan. It's considered their national day. Now, let's get into what we call the Xinhai Revolution. Xinhai is a name that comes from traditional Chinese thinking. Xin has to do with iron, and it comes from the belief in Chinese culture of 5 substances. They say Wu Xing, 5 elements, and iron is one of those, metal. And so the metal is the first part of that word, and hai is pig, and you can probably guess that that has to do with the zodiac, the animal symbols that represent different years. And so this is a way to show when this revolution happened. The metal pig revolution is the Xinhai Revolution. Well, the Xinhai Revolution brought together the various peoples of China. Now, you might think that Chinese people are generally all the same and from one race, but they're not. We've already explored that a little bit, talking about the Manchus. The Manchu people, the Manchu people, were the leaders of the Qing dynasty, but they were considered to be outsiders, foreigners, to the majority of the population, which were the Han Chinese people. There are many groups in China, but what happened is, these revolutionaries saw that the only way that they could win was to bring people together and to have the 5 races in one union. And so they created a flag, has 5 stripes, different colors, and they represent the different groups in China. You have the Mongols, you have the Muslim Uyghur people in Western China, and they are called the Hui people, and that has to do with their religion being Muslim. In Chinese, a Muslim is called a Hui Jiao Tu. So Hui, it's a different Hui from the other Hui that we mentioned, and that's one trouble with Chinese, is you have so many words that sound alike. But they created a flag, and that was going to be the symbol of this revolution, and it was to unite the 5 peoples of China. There was another flag used by the military, which was called the 18-star flag. The Iron Blood 18-star flag represented the 18 provinces of China at that time. So again, both of these ideas are not just one group rising to power, but bringing together everybody. The main battle of the Xinhai Revolution, even though it's really a name that covers the whole period, several, not just several months, but really all the way back to 1900 when Sun started his fighting. The main battle was called the Battle of Yangxia. Sorry, it's Yangxia. The Battle of Yangxia was the main battle, and it was, again, the revolutionaries had taken Wuchang, but then the Qing army marched in to fight them, and the army was led by Yuan Shi-kai, and eventually it was a very bloody battle, and the General Yuan Shi-kai, he decided that he would declare a ceasefire with the revolutionaries. And it was that ceasefire that actually allowed other uprisings around the country to gain momentum. Let's talk a little bit more about Yuan Shi-kai and what happened next. So Yuan Shi-kai, he was a general of the Qing army, and he had become so powerful by 1908 that the Qing leaders forced him into retirement. They didn't want a rival to their power. And then when this, starting in 1907, these uprisings keep happening, gaining momentum until 1911. In 1911, Yuan was called out of retirement, and he did lead the troops and showed that the Qing army was still stronger than the revolutionaries. But he realized that if he put down the revolution, that he would lose his job. And then again, he would have to go into retirement. And so this is a little bit of political maneuvering on the part of General Yuan, and that's Y-U-A-N, okay, in case you don't know how to spell that. And so he had to decide what he was going to do. And so that ceasefire partly is a way for him to show his wisdom, but also his craftiness, that he wanted to maintain power. So he wasn't just going to defeat the revolution. He was going to call a ceasefire. And basically, eventually the Qing army was on its heels, and he gave up. He surrendered the entire Qing army that he was leading to the revolutionaries when it became clear that the revolutionaries were rising in power. And this gave him a certain status with everybody, that he had saved lives by giving up, that he hadn't continued to fight, that he showed some sympathy with the revolution. And because of that, he actually honored people on both sides. He honored leaders on both sides, the Qing fighters and also the revolutionary fighters. And he was in a way a unifying figure. Remember, Sun, even though Sun was the father of this revolution, he had been overseas the whole time, and raising money. He was in the United States traveling when he heard, I think it was in Denver, when he heard that, there is this uprising that's actually successful, and Yuan has surrendered, and he hurried back as much as you could hurry back in 1911. And he got back, and Sun eventually would be the one who would be the first president of this new Republic of China. And that happened on January 1st, 1912. The ceasefire, by the way, came December 1st. So between December 1st and January 1st, Sun has to come in and make sure that there is a viable, a real government that can take shape. And then Yuan was kind of waiting in the shadows, knowing that he had the army on his side. And Yuan would have very quickly become the second president of the Republic of China. And Sun was forced to kind of retreat a little bit, and he would create a new party, not the Tongmenghui anymore, not the Revolutionary Party. He created the Nationalist Party, which is called the KMT today. Even it's also the Kuomintang. Kuomintang is how you say it in Mandarin, in that in the alphabet letters that are used for the Chinese words are KMT. Kuomintang. Okay. Finally, we need to talk about the Republic of China and what that means today. There's a lot of confusion because there's a Republic of China and a People's Republic of China, which is the communist country of mainland China, what we usually think of as China. Where is the Republic of China? The Republic of China today is in Taiwan. How did it get there? What does it mean? The Republic of China was founded on January 1st, 1912 by Sun Yat-sen. And it was all of China. It wasn't Taiwan, because remember, that was still controlled by Japan. Interestingly, back in 1894, 1900, Sun, remember, he was in Japan, he was a student in Japan, and he actually used Taiwan as a base of operations. So in many ways, Sun was a pirate himself. Remember, we said Taiwan was like a pirate island, and Sun used that as a base of revolutionary activity until the Japanese emperor said, no, you can't do revolutionary activity there anymore. And so then he had to go other places. Well, Sun became the father of the country, kind of like China's George Washington, right? Although he didn't fight the main battle, that was General Yuan. And right away, you see these political rivalries. This is no better than it was back in the dynasties and under the Ching, when you had these officials trying to get power and you don't really know who's in charge of the country. And so there were these political rivalries within the revolutionaries. I didn't mention, too, after the uprising of Zhennanguan failed. Remember, that was when Sun went and they seized the cannon tower, and it was significant. After that uprising failed, Sun was kind of pushed out because other revolutionaries didn't think he was being a good leader. Generally speaking, though, today he is revered, he is respected, higher than maybe any other Chinese figure in history, because he did have perseverance, and he could have taken all the power for himself, but eventually he realized that General Yuan had the army and there would have been a huge civil war, so he let go of power and let Yuan be the president, and that is very significant for his reputation. So what happened after General Yuan? Well, really, China disintegrated into fighting among warlords. Like we said, there was jockeying for power. There were people fighting for power, even within the new revolutionary leaders of China. And after a period of warlords where you had kind of a military dictatorship under Chiang Kai-shek, who we'll talk about later, the Republic of China was being opposed by communism, a communist government under Mao Zedong. And we will talk about Mao Zedong, even though he is a part of the revolution. We're going to save that for the next chapter when we talk about civil war. Finally, what does double 10 mean in Taiwan today and for Chinese all over the world? Because remember, it's not a Taiwanese holiday. It's a Chinese holiday that is a symbol. It's not even really Independence Day or Revolution Day. It was just one uprising of many, but that Wuchang uprising was the turning point. And so on October 10th, that is remembered. And there was the 100th anniversary just a few years ago, and that was a big deal. Traditionally on Double 10, October 10th, to remember that uprising and the victory of the revolution. You have military parades, and during the time of the Cold War, there were some pretty significant military parades in Taiwan to show the power that was competing with communist power on the mainland. Now that has lessened considerably. You still have huge military parades in mainland China, in communist China, but not as much in Taiwan. You have fireworks, you have school programs, children doing elaborate dances, and they've gotten really modern and hip-hoppy these days. You have political speeches, and in Taiwan, there's always this kind of balance between remembering that revolution and also thinking about what Taiwan's identity is today, because many in Taiwan want independence from China, but they're not allowed to have independence, and they are threatened by China that if they try to become independent, that they will be invaded. And finally, the lasting legacy of Double 10, it's freedom in Asia. Think about it. It was the first real democracy in all of Asia, with all those, the huge population of Asia, including India and China and Indonesia. And Taiwan today is still a democracy. They cling to those traditions of Double 10 and the Republic of China. And that's significant because even though they're small, only 22 million people, they can be a catalyst. They are a very rich nation for their size, and they can be a catalyst, creating democratic thinking all over Asia and the world, really. And since Hong Kong has become part of China, Hong Kong used to be a place where democracy was possible, but not so much anymore. There's a lot of threat from the Chinese government that any activity that is democratic will be put down. So please remember that the Republic of China exists today, and it's a symbol of democracy for a third, if not more, of the world's population. Thanks for watching and listening, and I hope that you'll be interested enough to go look up some of these spellings and find out how to say these Chinese names of the Chinese Revolution.